Thank you and welcome. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. I'm handing over presentation capabilities to you, Kathleen, and look forward to your brief introductions to yourselves.
Hey, my name is Kathleen Ackley, and I'm the Executive Director of Wallowa Land Trust. We are a small nonprofit land trust based in Enterprise, Oregon. That is in the northeast corner of the state. And our organization most recently has been closely intertwined with the efforts to conserve the moraines surrounding Wallowa Lake. In this particular session, we're going to be focusing on a case study that both myself and Wallowa Resources and other folks in our community have spent well over a decade pursuing. I have a screen share here, and Nils is going to be the one who's going to start it off. And so Nils, I will just assume that you'll give me some sort of a visual cue or something of when you would like me to advance the slide deck.
All right. Thanks, and thanks to Sustainable Northwest and everybody involved with the Northwest Community Forest Coalition for the invitation to be here. Excited to be here and share the story of the East Moraine Community Forest. As Ben mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of Wallowa Resources. Wallowa Resources is a community-based organization in Wallowa County, started in 1996 to essentially help Wallowa County and by extension, the hope was that we could create a model for other rural communities too that were impacted by shifts in public land management and changes in larger national and international economics and environmental conditions that affected rural communities across, the 90s. Help envision what our future could be. How do we continue to maintain vibrant local communities and a connection to the land and in a way that generates value to the public and the nation at large. So that's what our organization works on, and we have a pretty broad and diverse program spanning land restoration and management work, forest collaboration work, youth education work, and business development work. And I'm pretty much in the forest almost every day, not always for work, sometimes just walking the dogs. But I'm excited to be here. So I'll move on. Next slide, Kathleen. Well, let me just keep going while she's changing the slides. Just for context, Wallowa County is, typical to the west. It's a large county. It's about 3,500 square miles, more or less, 2.2 million acres, but with only 7,000 people, so about 2.3 people per square mile. It's in the very northeast corner of Oregon, bounded by some pretty deep canyon lands to the north and east, and the Wallowa Mountains pictured here to the west and south. 58% of our county is National Forest System land, and it includes Oregon's largest wilderness area. And we're pretty remote. We're over 64 miles to the interstate and any box store. There's only 2 ways in and out of the county in the winter, and one or both of them can periodically be closed due to weather. We are, like many isolated rural communities in the West, government and healthcare jobs have become a larger and larger contributor to total employment, but natural resources remain significant. Forestry has diminished in importance with the loss of mills and related businesses. ranching, including livestock and forage production and farming, remain very significant, contributing over 25% of local economic activity. Tourism has been growing on Wallowa Lake. Wallowa Lake has been a tourist destination since the 1910s, 1920s. It's been slowly growing over time. And most recently, Wallowa County was ranked number 4 by U.S. News and World Report in its ranking of up and coming rural communities. So we're seeing a lot of interest in and demand for retirement homes, second homes, and vacation homes, which is creating real challenges in our housing market and putting home ownership out of reach for many local working residents. So the next one, Kathleen. The Moraines, I think, so there you have kind of the full meal deal of this, with the city of Joseph in the foreground, the surrounding farmlands, very, very productive farmlands, many of them now over the last 5-6 years shifting to organic agriculture and regenerative practices, mixing crop production and cover crops and livestock grazing as part of a soil health program. But in the background, you have Wallowa Lake, and which is part of the central feature of Wallowa Lake State Park, one of the most popular state parks in Oregon. The full moraines, including the East Moraine to the left, and the Terminal Moraine and the West Moraine, and then the Wallowa Mountains and the Eagle Cap Wilderness behind us. And the moraines are recognized as one of the most complete examples of Pleistocene moraines in North America. The formation began about 300,000 years ago and concluded with the last glacial retreat about 19,000 years ago. They've also, culturally, they've been important spiritually and have historical significance to the Nez Perce Tribe, reflecting the long history of indigenous presence across this landscape. Since Western settlement in the 1870s, the moraines have been owned and managed as private working lands, with forest management and grazing as central features, as well as farming around the perimeters. People began to build homes around the lake shortly after World War I, but private landowners and eventually a special provision in the county land use plan prevented development along the lakeshore on the East Moraine. The landowners that have owned the East Moraine over time have always allowed certain special uses, including the very first Chief Joseph Days Rodeo was held on the East Moraine. And since then, landowners have periodically allowed weddings and trail walking and riding and skiing by permission, as well as hunting. It's obviously incredibly beautiful and tied into a number of really important attractions that are valued both by local residents as well as by visitors from across the country and even internationally. Next one, Kathleen. I mentioned that the importance of the moraines was recognized by the larger community and county government in the early 1990s with a special designation in the land use plan. And in 2005, a University of Idaho graduate student surveyed residents for a graduate project around sense of place. And across all demographic characteristics, Wallowa Lake and the moraines were the highest valued place in Wallowa County. And that, this reaffirmation of the importance of this location was important because going into 2006, 2007, as we lost the very last remaining sawmill in the county, the owner of this property, which was the Yankee family, which has forest RY timber, so forest properties and mills from Montana down to California, began to explore other market opportunities for that property, which represented about 10% of their total land holdings in Wallowa County. And as they began to explore that, a wide range of concern was expressed by a broad spectrum of residents across Wallowa County, and reflected in some of the headlines you see there. In 2007, Wallowa County, Wallowa Land Trust, and Wallowa Resources agreed to form a partnership, and we were supported in this venture by grants from Cycle Oregon to work together to secure the future of the East Moraine. I think I want you to go to the next slide, if I remember the order here, Kathleen. With that, as the Wallowa Lake Moraines Partnership formed, and initially it was the three entities I just mentioned, over time, then Oregon Parks and Recreation Department joined as well. And for a brief period of time, or not brief, but for a period of time, we also had the Trust for Public Lands involved in the partnership. But the original partnership and the vision and goals that have sustained the partnership since we formed in 2007, and with a first MOU, I think in 2011, we've been bound by this vision of securing the moraines as sustainable working landscapes, providing public access, and protecting that property from development, protecting the open space for wildlife, recreation, and natural resources. And there was also this sense that perhaps we could at least aspire to creating a model that would demonstrate the possibility of balancing environmental, economic, and public recreation goals, and demonstrating exemplary stewardship of a high-valued landscape. Then we, started negotiations with the Yankee Family Trust. And again, with that Cycle Oregon grant, and actually a supporting grant from the Nature Conservancy through the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, we completed our first appraisal in 2007 and made an offer to the landowners in January 2008. That offer was rejected pretty much out of hand, in part because the timing of our offer coincided with the period of Measure 37 and 49 in Oregon, which was providing landowners an opportunity to develop parts of their properties that had been encumbered by county land use provisions. And that fact, and given the unique nature of this property, the landowners had a much higher internal valuation and expected sales price for this property than our first appraisal reflected. And that challenge from 2007 onward for the next 11, 12 years remained pretty constant, that the constraints of the general appraisal process, and specifically the Yellow Book appraisal process, made even more challenging in a remote rural location with a limited number of comparable sales in any given year, and sometimes in reality no comparable sales, resulted in some pretty significant differences in the landowner's desired sales price and the generated appraised values. But our dialogue and conversations continued intermittently. I mean, the landowners were not aggressively pursuing development, although they were working to secure the rights to development per their Measure 49 claim. But we're patient, and we're providing us time to to hopefully improve our offer. And in the same time, they wanted us to demonstrate that we really had the wherewithal to complete this deal, which encouraged us, and the land trust and Kathleen in particular were critical in this, in beginning the process to apply for and secure forest legacy funds, sort of as a benchmark for our ability to raise a substantial amount of funds and actually be a credible buyer. It was our fourth appraisal, and a letter indicating a final offer, including a deadline to ultimately use the forest legacy funds, that eventually nudged the landowners to agree to a sales price of $6 million. And they gave us 1 year to close. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kathleen.
Okay. I'll just follow up with part of the reason why we were so motivated to actually acquire this property, is that the landowner had said that they want to sell it or they want to develop it. And the development potential is quite significant, as evidenced by this particular layout here of how many houses could go on that site, including 3 right up there on the iconic crest that would be, at least one of them would have been visible from just about anywhere around the lake. Yeah, and you already went over this one. So you can see you guys were not that coordinated in telling each other to move ahead in the slides. So Nils shared with you how we got to yes, which was a big deal. We've been working on that for, like 9 years, a decade, just getting to the point where they would say yes to our offer. And so when they did say yes, we were surprised, to say the least. And then, when we offered them $6 million, we asked for 2 years in our offer. We'll give you $6 million. Please give us 2 years to close. They said, okay, we'll take your $6 million, but you only have 1 year to come up with the money. And so that's when we had the collective heart attack, like, oh my God, they actually said yes. And oh my God, how are we going to come up with $6 million in 1 year? So to say that did evoke a little bit of heart burn on at least my part, yes, it certainly did. But there was no way we were going to let go of this incredible opportunity. So we had 1 year to get it done. And we had the 4 key partners of the Wallowa Lake Moraines Partnership, who together were pursuing the purchase of this property. So it's us, Wallowa Land Trust. It's Nils with Wallowa Resources. It is our county, so the County Board of Commissioners, and then finally Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. So that was really key, is having all 4 of us together, dedicated in this partnership to pursuing this property, because our land trust, I don't think any of us individually could have pulled this off by ourselves. So that was really key. Of course, we had to come up with a budget. Yes, we knew that the property was going to cost us $6 million, but as all of you out there who've dealt with any of these projects, you know that there are a lot more costs than just the $6 million or the purchase price of the property. There was a lot more to think about. So I wanted to share with you a bit of how we developed the budget. So when you're thinking about buying a piece of property, it's not just the cost. You also have to think about, well, what are all the due diligence activities that we're going to have to undertake to get this done? There's appraisal costs, because we had to update the appraisal. And just to let you know, Nils, if you remember, was it $24,000 to get that property appraised? It was not cheap. It was a significant cost. So there's that. We had to get it surveyed. We had to do hazardous waste assessment. So we had to think of all of those activities that needed to be completed prior to closing and put that into the budget. We also had to think about our staff time and all the resources that our organizations were going to be putting into doing this work to get to the end. But then there's also just the cost of raising money. So in order for us to pull off this capital campaign, we also had to think about what it would cost for my time to spend a year raising funds? What's it going to cost for Wallowa Resources to spend their time? Because between our two nonprofits, we're the ones that led the fundraising aspect of it. The land trust served as the conduit through which most of the funds came through. And that way we could keep track of it all in a centralized place. And folks who donated also were able to get a tax deduction for their donation. But finally, probably even more importantly than all those other things I've mentioned, is the stewardship fund. And this sometimes, for those of you out there in the land conservation community, can be know that this can be a challenging thing to raise money for. Funders generally don't want to give you money for a stewardship fund. And oftentimes we always ask the landowner to make a contribution to this. So this was a big, important piece of this project for us, because the way the project was laid out is that we would buy the property, Wallowa Resources and Wallowa Land Trust signed on the dotted line of that purchase and sale agreement saying we would buy it, knowing that at closing, we were going to convey that purchase and sale agreement to the county. So Wallowa County would end up being the final owner of this particular piece of property. And that was for a number of reasons, but probably the most salient one is the fact that the Forest Legacy Program very specifically states that if you're going to use these federal dollars to buy that piece of property, it has to go into government ownership. And so that's why Wallowa County was going to be the final landowner. And so for us, it was very important to be able to sell this project with a stewardship fund, because once you buy the property, that is just the beginning of all of the work that it really takes to monitor, to manage, to actively manage and steward a piece of property. So that's why you see the stewardship fund there. So where did all of that money come from? That large pot. Well, first and foremost was the Forest Legacy grant. That grant was almost $3.7 million. And that was only, they have limitations because, as you know, almost all federal or state granting programs require match. So even if that was the total budget, we wouldn't have been able to spend it all because you have to have match. So Forest Legacy was about 3.7. Oregon State Parks, that was through the local government grant program. Wallowa County acquired that grant for $1 million. And then finally, and probably to me most impressively, well, not finally, but most impressively, was the amount of generosity that we received just from private individuals and families across Oregon and in fact the United States. So you can see it was almost $1.4 million that we received from private individuals, and that happened within a year's time frame. We also have private foundations give us funds, and then the Nez Perce Tribe also contributed financially to the project. So when we think about what was so successful about how we actually did, because we did, yes, in case you guys were wondering, we did actually raise the money. The keys to the success of this campaign. Well, I think there are several things to think about. One was we did hire a campaign consultant. So we hired a gentleman out of the East Coast who had a ton of experience to really be our coach and keep us on track. He would call us regularly and say, hey, where are you guys with this? Where are you guys with that? He ran both Wallowa Resources and Wallowa Land Trust databases through a wealth screening program, which was incredibly helpful because that allows you to look at the donors who you already have contact with and see who would be most likely to support your cause. Because the reality is, none of us know Oprah. Nobody's going to be able to call Oprah to give us all that money. It's really going to be the people that you and I know and who we have that direct contact with. So we had our campaign consultant help us and be our cheerleader and really push us along. We also, I think the charismatic landscape that we had dealing with really is in our favor, because for many people, this was the last unprotected iconic landscape in the state of Oregon. We've been talking about it for years. It was not like nobody knew what we were up to and they were suddenly surprised by our capital campaign, because we've been talking about it for a very long time. And it is an incredible landscape that people could call up in their mind immediately when we started talking about it. I think also the broad bipartisan support we received for this project was critical. We started early talking to people, and I cannot stress this enough. Before you even get to the yes of the landowner signing, you know, the yes, we're going to sell you the property, getting the backing of the important people throughout your community and beyond is critical. I put on this slide a listing of some of the key folks who provided support to this project, including all of we had our entire board of commissioners, we had our representative supportive, we had our federal representative supported, we had the governor supportive, and we got letters of support from all of those individuals, which was hugely helpful in our success. Of course, we were able to get a lot of good publicity. And I really think that the team of individuals that was dedicated to seeing this through, including our extensive board of directors. I mean, it's not just like Nils and I, we had a lot more people involved in getting this done because we really could not have done it by ourselves. So when I think through the lessons learned that I would share with you, I think the timeline is critical. I mean, it was hard for us to pull this off in a year. I also, though, look at right now with what's going on globally and within the United States and economically of how hard it would be to be finishing this campaign if we were still doing it this year right now. So having time is good, but also having a deadline is important. So an open-ended deadline, I do not recommend that. I think communicating your expectations clearly to your partners, to your donors, and to the public is very clear. So they totally understand what it is that you're asking for. If you're going to ask somebody to give you $50,000, what exactly are you going to do with it? And how are you going to do it with it and why? One that I definitely take to heart was taking notes of every meeting and memorializing commitments. When you have multiple partners and you're meeting a lot, you know, sometimes it's hard, like who's going to take the notes? Who's going to write all that down? Did you capture that? And sometimes I'd be lazy. I don't want to take notes. I'm in the middle of trying to participate in a meeting. But that without that consistent, coherent tracking of who said and committed to what, when, and making sure you're tracking that through time, I can say definitively that would have been pretty helpful in a few situations that we've had recently. I would say also preparing for turnover of staff, participants, your allies, shifting politics. Nils is the last remaining man standing from the very beginning of this project. I wasn't here at the beginning. Our county commissioners have had a complete switch of who those elected officials are. The representative staff with Oregon State Parks has changed maybe 4 different times. And you have to continually, in many ways, start over again with bringing everybody up to speed and making sure that they understand where you're at and where you're going, which of course speaks to that wonderful documenting of meeting minutes, which everybody loves to do. Finally, take that original budget and double it. There's enough said about that. You guys can just imagine. Just give yourself more money. Just add some more dollar figures to whatever amount of money you want to raise, because I guarantee it, you will need it at some point. So, well, those were my words of wisdom for now. Now I pass it off to Nils.
All right, thank you. We're going to cover, just so people know where we're going with this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the emerging management plan and governance structure for the property. And then Kathleen's going to close us out with a discussion about the conservation easement and a few other observations. And then we will very much welcome your questions and discussion about all of this. So, you know, stepping back one point, that, you know, this was a brand new endeavor for all the parties involved, and in a large, high profile and complicated endeavor. One of the things that happened early on was that there was, you know, agreement that we wanted the county to eventually own it. But the county asked the land trust and Wallowa Resources to be the initial signers of the purchase and sale agreement with the landowners. And so that right, that purchase and sale right, was initially assigned to Wallowa Resources and Wallowa Land Trust as we pursued this capital campaign Kathleen has just summarized. In the process, as we knew we were going to be successful, as we gained momentum and success over the course of the 12 months, and started thinking about conveying that right to the county government for closing, we had a conversation about expanding the initial 3 sort of value statements that the partnership had been operating on for 11 years into this set of conservation values that would be part and parcel of the closing documents, and really sort of establish the parameters for ownership and management of this property, and sort of continued alignment of all the parties working together for its management and stewardship. And this is both a reflection of our values, but also the values and intentions that we had communicated in the campaign, against which a whole range of public and private parties had contributed funding to. And so we had commitments, we had provided inducements, and we have some commitments to those people to honor these values. So these values are sort of the broad touchstones for the management plan, part of the closing documents, and they really provide the foundation for all of this work moving forward. You want to move on to the next one? Against that set of values, I won't go into this discussion yet. First, I'll just say that we then, sort of before we began to try to formalize the governance structure and management structure that's in front of you now, the partners agreed to assign different lead entities for different aspects of the management plan. And that those lead roles would tap other expertise and other stakeholders in the county to create kind of mini collaborative processes around forest management, grazing management, cultural resources, recreation and trail systems, with additional input around wildlife, botany, ESA species, and the like. We have Spalding's catchfly on the property, for example. And as part of that, the Nez Perce Tribe was asked to participate from the very beginning in all aspects of this, but also to take a leadership role around the cultural resource aspects of the management plan. As we kept working on this, there was a recognition we needed to try to formalize a little bit the governance structure and subsidiary structures in the process. And so where we ended up with is essentially like this, that as you can see on this chart, the final authority regarding the use, permissions, and management of the property is vested with Wallowa County and the Wallowa County Board of Commissioners, a publicly elected body. That authority is bound by federal, state, and county laws, relevant laws, as well as specific terms and conditions attached to the title, including but not limited to the statutory warranty deed and the pending conservation easement. Then the Wallowa Lake Moraines Partnership is essentially there to, because we're sort of the long-standing body that has carried forward the campaign, but essentially there to manage the stewardship fund to contribute towards ownership and management costs, and continue to sort of to reach closing on the commitments of the Forest Legacy Fund grant, which includes sort of the first multi-use management plan and the conservation easement. What the long-term role of this partnership will be versus the East Moraine Management Board is a little bit unclear, but clearly, the need for an entity that manages a stewardship fund, and because those funds remain in primarily in Wallowa Land Trust's account, but a small portion is also in Wallowa Resources account from the campaign, there'll still be a role there for that body. The more important body moving forward will be this East Moraine Management Board, which is, as I mentioned, sort of breaking this up into resource pieces and then integrating them back into a multiple use management plan. And the idea is that the management plan will be advanced to the Board of Commissioners for approval. And if the Board of Commissioners approve it, that's straightforward. If they have concerns or recommendations for revisions, that it would come back to the management board to work through that feedback and any revisions. That the Board of Commissioners would not independently make revisions to the plan. That the responsibility for making those revisions would stay with this broader management board, consisting of the parties you see there. And I think most people know the acronyms, but it's Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, Wallowa Land Trust, Wallowa Resources, Wallowa County, Oregon Department of Forestry, Nez Perce Tribe, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And more recently, there's been a discussion about adding 2 at-large members to represent sort of other members of the residents and citizenry of Wallowa County. And ODF has a particular role in that they need to approve the forest stewardship plan as a key element of the Forest Legacy funding. The other part about that is that it's anticipated, although it has not happened yet, that Wallowa County will appoint a member of its Public Works Department or some other branch of county government to be at a minimum the point of contact for all parties, including the public, about the property, as well as the key sort of liaison coordinator for these various structural elements of the governance. That hasn't happened yet, so we're a little bit uncoordinated right now, with the public not really knowing who to speak to, and it comes into various members of the partnership. But that's an element we are working through this fall. Next. Within that management plan process, it's, what I've described so far sounds like very much kind of a classic government agency process, and with just, selected bodies participating and doing this work. We are really trying hard to have an open and inclusive process. And there's actually been multiple years of work with surveys and focus groups trying to get a real understanding about, and particularly the local communities, the residents of Wallowa County, what their highest sort of aspirations and highest value uses are, identify where they anticipate concerns or conflicts, and build that into this management plan. And more recently, the Land Trust has led both an online survey process as well as a series of focus groups that have generated a lot of good information about, from local residents on those issues. And, not surprisingly, highlighted, and, areas of potential conflict between grazing and recreation, for example, or between different types of recreation like horseback riding and mountain bike riders, as well as, sort of this general sense that sure, sustainable forestry and forest stewardship sounds good, but, as always, the concerns are what that will look like in practice. And so a real desire from the public to get more information from this management board and the commissioners on what that will look like and how that will take place. And so we actually had a specific community tour focused around the forest management plan, explaining the goals and long-term objectives and how we were going to handle different sensitive issues as part of that process. And we're committed to continue to do that. We do recognize that some of these tension points and conflicts are just part of life on a multiple use property like this. And since we have not really started implementing the management plan, we don't have real lessons learned yet from that. But it's clear that, the more you can share, the more you can sort of proactively engage the community and try to ensure they understand what you're doing and they're not just presuming to know, and you can dispel myths and rumors, the better off you are. Back to you, Kathleen.
Sorry, I didn't mean to rush you there. I thought there was another slide there. So exciting, the technicalities of a conservation easement. I'm seeing a little bit of a couple of you I can see from Land Trust, so I'm not going to go over the entire details of what a conservation easement is, except to say that it is a legal agreement between a landowner and a qualified entity to hold the easement, such as a land trust, and restricts certain uses while allowing other uses on a piece of property. And so there's several reasons why we decided to use the tool of a conservation easement to protect this piece of property in particular. And those are the things I wanted to talk to you about. So if we go back to the list of funders that we had several slides ago, the biggest chunk of money again is coming from the Forest Legacy Program. That is through a pot of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So thank you to all of you who wrote in asking for permanent reauthorization of that fund, because that's how we paid to buy this property. That particular funding source, which many of you, if you're looking to do community forests, you probably have looked into Forest Legacy funding. It's highly competitive, but now that it's fully funded, there's a lot more money out there. Of course, your challenge is going to be getting the match. So the Forest Legacy Program has certain strings, if you will, attached to the money. I already mentioned one, which is if you're going to use that money to purchase a piece of property, then it has to then go into local government ownership. Now, Forest Legacy can also be used to purchase a conservation easement. And that typically is the use of that pot of money, is to buy conservation easements, not to buy a piece of property outright. However, this landowner didn't want to sell a conservation easement. They wanted us to buy the property. So for that reason, the property is going into, is now in Wallowa County ownership. And upon purchase, there was a deed restriction that was put on the property when we recorded it. And that is with the Forest Legacy. And it's fairly simplistic, some very simple deed restrictions. There was some additional restrictions that was recorded at the time through the Oregon Recreation Department. And those mainly were around for requirement of public access. However, our coalition had talked about more than just those relatively simple restrictions that Forest Legacy had in place for our vision of this property. Our vision was around preventing future residential commercial development, preventing subdivision, protecting the incredible habitat, the cultural resources, allowing for certain types of recreation, non-motorized, low impact. And we felt that this additional layer of protection, in addition to what was already going to be on there through the Forest Legacy Program, which in fact didn't encompass the entirety of that property, we felt that a conservation easement was the best tool to do that. And so if we would have had more time, like the 2 years we were gunning for to finish that, the project, ideally, we would have had the conservation easement done and everything would have been done at closing. That didn't happen because we just didn't have the time or resources to be able to do it. So we closed with certain restrictions in place and an agreement between Wallowa Land Trust and Oregon Department of Forestry, who would be co-holders of a conservation easement on this piece of property. And that agreement was between us and with the county that they would put this easement on the property. So now we've been working on the details of the conservation easement. And for those of you who've worked on this, you know that can be a lot of technical work and time and energy to do that. And so the things that we were looking for was, one, additional protections over time to ensure that all of the promises we made to funders and to supporters, this was our way of ensuring that what we said was actually going to happen. Two, it also gave us a strong capacity to be able to enforce those provisions over time, because those are embedded into the easement document. And it was our guarantee to our funders, again, with our donors, saying that all of these promises that we made in our grant application and our grant agreements and all the materials we put out to the public, this is where we guarantee to you that those things are going to happen. And so the key elements of the conservation easement are, it defines what the conservation values are that will be protected. And Nils went over those previously when he was talking about the management. A conservation easement says what are the allowed uses and what are the uses that are not allowed, that are prohibited. And so this is just a very basic summary of an example of allowed and prohibited uses on this particular piece of property. If forestry activity will continue to be allowed, grazing and economic activities such as agricultural activities will continue to be allowed. Non-motorized public recreational activities will be allowed. However, there will be no residential development. The ability to do commercial development, the ability to subdivide the property, all of those rights will be extinguished. This particular document also does require a management plan, which was again referencing back to what Nils was speaking to. And that management plan hits at all of those different uses and tries to balance them. So, you know, forestry, cultural resources, grazing, recreation, habitat. How are we going to manage all of those together and in a way that they can be balanced across those uses? And this document, the easement, references the management plan. So essentially it says the landowner is agreeing to follow the terms of this management plan, which is then it is collectively decided upon by the members of the partnership and other members of the public, as you saw in that slide that Nils showed. And then finally, again, it enables the holders of the conservation easement to actually enforce the terms of the easement. So those are the main key elements of an easement. If I would say what the challenges are and lessons learned specific to the conservation easement, not the project as a whole. Of course, I think if we could have had this done before when we closed the property, that would have been terrific. It's not always possible. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have had has to do with, again, going over time and what we spoke about as a partnership and the vision we agreed to 10 years ago or more, and how trying to keep that continuity through time as people change, as we have different, as I said, different staff, we have different elected leaders, and how do we continue to keep that continuity, that shared vision, and see that being translated into this legal document. Because as you know, you could say, yeah, that's a great idea. We should do X. Let's do that. And then suddenly the person who said yes to that is presented with a 15-page, very complicated legal document where they're like, oh my God, what am I promising? What did I agree to? That can be a bit daunting. There also, this project, as you probably have guessed, has had multiple interests. Sometimes they're competing interests. Nils referenced some of just the recreational potential conflicts that we're going to see there. You know, we're not going to make everybody happy with how this is going to end up. I mean, there are people who would love it if there was never any access at all on the East Moraine and there was no activity whatsoever and it was only habitat. I mean, that would be just one extreme. You know, we get phone calls. We've gotten phone calls about people saying, why are there cows up there? We don't want any cows up there. It's an ongoing public perception. I don't want to say battle, because that makes it sound like it's a fight, but it is an ongoing responsibility to actively share with the community what it is that we're doing up there. And also when it comes to entering into a long-term partnership, of which a conservation easement is, you have to make sure that the landowners fully understand what is in that conservation easement and what they're going to be obligated to do. And the people holding the easement have to realistically understand what it is that they're agreeing to actually enforce over time. Because long after the current elected officials are gone, and I'm gone from the organization, but it's still the organization here, we're still going to be in that relationship with that landowner, ensuring that these promises that we made, you know, during this brief moment of time are carried out through time. So yeah, I think it's complicated and it takes a lot of persistence. And I think in many ways it takes being able to step back and just think a bit big picture and beyond yourself and your own narrow frustrations at any given moment in time. Yeah, I think that was most of what I had for that. And then we have at least half hour for folks to bomb us with all your questions, right? Nils, did I miss anything else that you wanted to throw in there? Okay.
Great job.
Thank you. So I don't know if folks wanted to go ahead and jump in there, though there's actually something in the chat. I always forget to look at the chat. Maybe Ben was going to read out the chat, but are the grassland portions of the moraine and surrounding areas the original habitat type, or was it deforested for livestock? Actually, no. What is fascinating about the grasslands on the East Moraine is that is the southernmost extent of the Zumwalt Prairie, which is, maybe you folks know that the Nature Conservancy owns a preserve of 33,000 acres of this incredible grasslands. It's all native bunchgrass prairie, which has been hugely diminished. But no, those are in pretty good shape, native grasslands. We do have some invasive grasses that we've seen, but nope. Nils, do you have anything else to say about that?
No, I think you did it well.
Oh, you already answered. You answered in the chat. I'm such an idiot. I didn't even read that. All right, fine.
You answered it better than I did, so.
Okay, someone asked the name of a campaign consultant. You know, I'm so embarrassed. The reason I didn't say it is because I forgot. It's David Allen. David Allen, right? Nils? Yes. And I'm happy to give you David's contact information. He's fantastic. He knew when to be nice and he knew when to be a bully and tell us to put on me to put on my big girl pants and go ask for $50,000 even when I didn't want to do it.
And David used to live and work in Oregon. Now I think he's in Wisconsin, but he had a long history of working with the Nature Conservancy here in Oregon.
Yeah.
So we have another question from the chat box. This one from Jean. What are your plans for future acquisitions?
Yeah, Nils, what are your plans?
So I think I think there's kind of divergent issues that are coming up. The land, Wallowa Land Trust is obviously a key player thinking about priorities for conservation easements and, securing open space and working lands. And Kathleen, you'd need to speak to your priorities. County commissioners, or at least one of them, one of the three in particular, is very keen to build off of the East Moraine success and explore whether or not we could secure other working forest lands in the county. We have about 140,000, maybe 40,000 acres of industrial forest lands. The remaining property of the Yankee Family Trust, owned by the Ron Yankee Timber Inc., is all up for sale right now. And the larger block, which is managed, which has 6 or 7 different investment funds managed by Hancock, we anticipate bits and pieces of that will be coming up for sale in the not too distant future. And so we're trying to figure out, could we expand on this model of a community forest to include sort of much larger and more traditional sort of working forest landscapes. On the one hand, they would speak to a lot of local values and generate a lot of local benefits to our community. On the second hand, because they're not quite as unique or spectacular, the capital campaign to acquire them will be a little bit more challenging.
I'll move on to the next question from Gabe at the Whatcom Land Trust. Through your community engagement efforts, have you identified non-timber resources that may have economic viability? A couple of examples include non-timber products, recreation, ecotourism, restoration work, etc.
Well, specific to the East Moraine property, one of the largest drivers economically is tourism. People recognize that iconic landscape, preserving it as it is, has a direct impact on tourism, tourists wanting to come and see that landscape. As far as some of the actual guided recreation activities, ecotourism, restoration work, there are certain limits of how we can make money off this property, because the main purpose is as a community forest and to continue to support forestry activities in our community. And so if we're going to weigh certain activities, that one is going to be primary, a use of that forest. I certainly think there are opportunities for guided recreation activities. How much income that would bring directly to the landowners or of the property, I think might be limited. I'm reading what he wrote. Nils, did you have anything else to add about the alternative economics for the forest?
We're it's hard, I think. I mean, I don't think today people believe there's any significant non-timber forest products that would generate substantial revenue. And as Kathleen kind of alluded to, we're trying not to over commercialize activities on this property either. There has been some discussion about the potential for some concessions that might allow for guided recreation activities, and particularly sort of to expand the opportunities like at Wallowa Lake, where an outfitter runs horse trips up into the Eagle Cap, maybe they might want to run some horse trips up and over the moraine too. And the potential to connect this moraine landscape with the landscape both to the south and the east with some larger trail runs or mountain bike runs. But we also don't want, we know from other properties the importance of sort of keeping control of recreation trail development. There's another property out here sort of in the inland northwest that all the different users on that property, they allow motorized use too, and the Jeep, the Jeep enthusiasts and the ATV enthusiasts and the mountain bike riders and others are all independently developing their own trail systems, which is causing more and more degradation and conflict. And so, we're going to try to keep some control on that.
And Gabe, you asked a bit more about ensuring that if a local community forest, that it isn't sold or developed in the future. And that speaks back to why we have that additional layer of protection of the conservation easement. So there are multiple layers. There's a forest legacy deed restriction. There's the Oregon State Parks requirements that also got recorded with a deed. There's also grant agreements that we have that if those are violated, you basically have to give the money back. And then the conservation easement. And those are to ensure that, 50 years from now, the current landowners, current makeup of the county commissioners decide, well, we don't want to own this property anymore, or we should develop a conference center, that they would not be able to do that.
Thanks for your questions. Thanks for your thoughtful responses, everyone. By way of a time check, we'll take 2 more questions and try to wrap up in the next 10 minutes here. We'll use the old classroom trick of respectful silence. We'll take your time to think of your questions.
I have a question. Why is Jean Jankitis on here twice? Is there 2 of her? Like she's like watching from 2 different screens. Oh, and then she says, okay, this is our first East Side presentation. Do you see this work having any particular difference, East Side versus West Side? That's a good question. Beyond just the biological, ecological differences, I think you could also speak to the sensibilities of the community. We don't have any large urban centers like they have Portland on the west side. I think that I think that the conservative political makeup of our community certainly influenced some of the decisions we made and how we moved forward with the project. Nils, though, I think you probably have more of a handle on these kind of projects happening on the west side versus the east. So I will hand it off to you to answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main difference is there's certainly, I mean, a significant difference is the economic valuation of timberland and forests and the opportunity to realize that value through local market opportunities, through existing mills and other markets. And there's a big difference between the East and the West that affects traditional timber values and forest products, but also even carbon valuations if you're trying to pursue those markets. And so it does, you know, on the one hand, you'd think that that might be offset with lower real estate prices, and in general, that's probably true. But for the reasons I mentioned at the introduction, in the sort of context setting, we're actually seeing a lot of external interest in real estate acquisition in Wallowa County. And so it's driving up the price of land, and it's driving up the price of homes. That is disproportional to, and really to some extent in an opposite direction of the value of our forested lands, but primarily because we've lost so many mills and marketing opportunities, and the cost of forest management and transportation have increased over time. But then you compound that in the East with increasing risk and risk mitigation related to wildfire, and there's a financial planning challenge on the East that is different. I wouldn't have any idea whether it's greater or less, but it's different, and it is certainly significant on the East side.
One thing I thought of as you were speaking, I've noticed from just general grant writing is that sometimes it can be a much harder sell to convince the funders who mainly reside on the west side of why they should expend their resources on the east side, because they see us as having endless amounts of open space and natural area. So why it's hard to convey why anything would qualify as threatened on the east side as opposed to the west side. And particularly when it comes to farmland, that one's been a challenge, but I just wanted to add that too. I'll follow up and address Gabe's question about our collaborating with the Nez Perce Tribe. So the Nez Perce Tribe was not only a financial contributor to the project, they also actively participated in putting together the management plan. We hired them to do a cultural resources inventory. They also have been working with Wallowa Resources on the forestry component and having input on that. Currently, we do not have a cultural easement or agreement. However, I would remind you that this property is publicly owned, so it would be different if it were a privately owned piece of property, but they are already going to have inherent in the nature of it being a public piece of property. A lot of those things that we would normally formalize in some sort of a cultural easement, they already have those rights. They were not ever taken away. Oh, Holly, where are you at actually with your question? You say you're in a conservative rural community.
You know, one thing about Holly's question that I'll just jump in on while we're maybe waiting for her to speak up is that you did that. I mean, in all honesty, when the partnership first formed and before Kathleen got here, you know, the same was true of in Wallowa County. That you know that they had core support from part of the community, but there were certainly others that were suspicious about land trusts and the tools that land trusts use. And that's kind of why the partnership was important, because and it was recognized as such that rather than having a land trust sort of lead a project like this on its own, a partnership that included Wallowa County Board of Commissioners and Wallowa Resources and Wallowa Land Trust combined would dissuade some of that suspicion and skepticism and and speak to sort of a much broader swath of the community and feel and provide more assurance to this larger swath of the community that their perspectives and values would be carried through in this process.
We actually do have a large, broad support of both liberal, conservative, bipartisan support of our land trust here in Wallowa County. It takes a while though, and I really think it speaks to relationship building and having people know you, know your staff. You're out in the community and you're seen as a member of the community. You're sticking with it, and you're demonstrating your worth in your community, I think is critical. And I think the effort that we've had with our tribal partners, that also has been a challenge because, like you are mentioning, that they're suspicious. The locals are suspicious. And we certainly see that here as well. And we have we've been working on a tribal engagement program. But one of the most rewarding things, at least I have seen as part of this particular project, is the effort that we put into wanting to even get the Nez Perce Tribe involved, because it did take quite a bit of effort to get them. They would tell us over and over again, yes, we're going to support this. We support this. We want to do more than just be a financial contributor. But then when you actually go try and get them actively involved, that was much harder. But once they did get involved, and it has been an incredible experience for me. It's been wonderful relationship building, because we've had, one tribal member who runs the Cultural Resources Department who's been participating in these meetings. He's come over and met the county commissioners, had lunch with them. Building those personal relationships, I think, is absolutely key. But of course, then you go back to the problem, well, when staff changes, then what? So I don't necessarily have an answer for that, but I think that the more you can be out in your community and demonstrating that you're just a regular person, and you make those kind of close relationships with people from all broad spectrum, they see that you're not so horribly evil after all. Except Nils. We still know he's horribly secretly evil. I mean, if I'm not answering it clearly, feel free to ask any more questions, but I think Ben probably wants us to be quiet, or me to be quiet at this point.
Thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful session. Appreciated all of your insights. And look forward to being in touch. Unless there are any last questions, I think we'll wrap up here and let you get on and take a walk outside. Thank you so much for joining. Nils, Kathleen, it's really been a pleasure. I wish you all the best of luck. Look forward to being in touch soon.
I'm going to put my phone number and email in the chat box before you hang up if people want it.
Absolutely.
Thank you both so much. And just one more plug for tomorrow's bonus session in the morning on appraisals. Please don't forget to join us there.
If you have more technical questions about the motivation and process of appraisals, we have the U.S. Forest Service's regional appraisal expert, as well as one of the principals of one of the region's leading forestry consulting firms, as well as the regional coordinator for the Forest Service Community Forest Program. Really fantastic opportunity to hear more about process and to get more technical questions answered.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Ben, for the invitation.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Yep.
Bye-bye.